One of the key stages in a product design process is defining the problem which you're attempting to solve, or identifying a need which you can address. I'm Adam Porter, I'm an inventor of board games, card games, dice games and puzzles, and as my design career has progressed, I've increasingly found myself approaching game design with a goal in mind from the outset. In a previous video, I discussed how many designers work from a starting point of inspiration or experimentation. And I did the same in my earliest designs, and no doubt I will again. But I want to encourage designers to utilize a more targeted approach of empathizing with the end user, the player, understanding their problems and designing in order to solve them. Since board games are inherently luxury items, identifying a problem can be a challenge. It's not as easy as just saying, well, people need to be able to reach the highest points in their house and then inventing a collapsible ladder. I mean, nobody genuinely needs a board game. So our definition of problem needs to be a little bit more nuanced. So I'm going to divide problems in the board game industry into 4 broad types. Please let me know in the comments if you can think of any more categories of problem which I've missed. So the first category is circumstantial need. The second is a mechanical problem. The third is a physical constraint. And the fourth is a publisher's priority. I guess the closest to a true problem is the circumstantial need. So this means identifying a situation where a player or players might wish to play a certain type of game and ensuring that you have a suitable product to offer them. The COVID pandemic has highlighted this sort of need. So with players unable to gather together in groups, some publishers have sadly found that their catalogue of products is lacking in desirable games. The problems could be defined as players want to play board games but they're unable to get together in groups of any substantial size. So how do we give them the gaming experience that they want? Or alternatively, it could be video communication has rapidly become an everyday part of people's lives. How do we utilise this technology to give the players an experience which is current and fits their modern lifestyle? Depending on how you define the problem, your solutions might be quite different. So if you opted for that first definition, you might focus on producing deep, immersive solo games, or perhaps games which are at their best with just 2 players. If you use the second definition, you might start promoting digital versions of your existing games, or highlight the fact that your game is playable via Zoom and other video conferencing platforms. The global pandemic is a very rare example of individuals worldwide changing their day-to-day habits all at the same time. But circumstantial need could be much more mundane or domestic than that. Joshua Lobkowitz identified that there was a need for portable games for backpackers. If you're travelling the world, you're going to want something light which can be played in a train, on a bunk bed or on a pub table. So Joshua founded the company Travel Buddy Games to address this need. But you might decide that you want to create games which could be played in a car, or on the sofa, or sat up in bed, or indeed lying down in bed. But if you can identify a circumstance and a potential audience, then you might be onto something. With mechanical problems, I'm of course talking about gameplay mechanisms rather than the physical engineering of a product, but the principle is the same. We identify something which isn't quite working in existing games, something which doesn't flow or doesn't engage the players, doesn't provide an overall satisfying experience. And there are a few well-recognised mechanical problems that are known in the industry, and probably many more which haven't yet been properly identified. So one example, which is often discussed, is the alpha player problem in cooperative games. If all players are working together to win a game, how do we prevent one domineering player from taking over? And many games have solved this problem in a variety of creative ways, mostly by limiting communication, as in Magic Maze or in the game Mysterium, or by making the cooperative activity so fast and frantic that the players can't keep track of the other players' actions. Nonetheless, in many traditional cooperative games, by which I mean the style of game made popular by Matt Leacock with his Forbidden series and Pandemic series of games, the problem remains. Gamers need to pick their players carefully when playing these games to avoid being bullied down a certain path by a strong-willed strategist at the table. A related problem is that of the semi-cooperative game. This is where the players all win or lose together, but the players each have their own objectives, sometimes hidden, and in the situation where the team all win, one player from the team is hailed the ultimate victor. I mean, there's clearly a desire for such a product. Many games have used the term semi-co-op as a key selling point. I think it's desirable because it's true to life. Rarely in life do people all set about a task with one collective goal, entirely altruistically, working for the common good, even when that disadvantages their own position. And it's far more realistic for in-game characters to have their own agendas and priorities which might not mesh with each other despite a shared interest. The problem is, if players feel they're not going to be the outright winner, why would they help someone else take that title rather than let the whole team lose? Often a game designer will manufacture their own problem and then set about solving it. So for example, Donald X Vaccarino identified that deck building was a very enjoyable pre-game experience for CCG players, and he manufactured the problem, how can we make deck building a core component of the game experience? And Dominion was the result, and it saw huge success, despite players having no idea that this was something that was missing in their lives. Designer Ignacy Trzewiczek was frustrated that board games lacked sophistication in their artificial intelligence. If you drew an event from a deck, it never had any connection to any of the decisions that the players had made. Ignacy had identified a problem, and he set about defining it. How do you make a board game respond intelligently to the players' decisions? He ideated on this problem, and he presented a solution in his cooperative game Robinson Crusoe. Players draw cards throughout that game which offer them narrative choices. Eat the berries, or leave them behind. Search the cave, or walk on by. If they make a certain choice, they might gain an immediate reward, but the card is then shuffled into an event deck, and it's likely to re-emerge later in the game with a consequence. So that might be food poisoning or an animal attacks. Hence, the events in the game feel connected to the decisions taken by the players. Our third category was about physical constraints. So this is where a game exists, but it's hindered by its production. Perhaps it's too big, too expensive, too hard to set up, too hard to put away. In the classic public domain game, Eat Poop You Cat, each player writes a word or sentence and then passes it to the next player who draws that word or sentence. They then pass the paper on again, folding it to hide the original word. And then the next player writes down a guess for what that drawing is of and then folds the paper over and passes it on again. And then the next player draws an image of the thing that's been written, and the process continues as the various folded pieces of paper are passed around the circle. This process is a little bit fiddly, and it results in lots of wasted paper. It's easy to see what other players have drawn or written accidentally, and it requires a little bit of creativity and imagination to decide what to write in the first place. Telestrations defines the problem as follows. How can you package Eat Poop You Cat into a commercial product, providing value and solving some of the user experience issues? A designer might look at an existing game and ideate ways to make something similar with reduced components to minimize cost and box size. Or they might alter gameplay to make setup and teardown less arduous. Perhaps the game is very dependent on text, which limits its international appeal. A game designer might produce a similar product which requires no text at all. Our final category is publisher priorities. So this involves empathizing with the publisher. What are the problems that they're trying to solve? But it's important not to forget that there is a player at the end of the chain. Publishers have relationships with their players, but also with their retailers. And these people expect a continuous flow of consistently high quality products with a familiar identity to other games within the brand. If you have a publisher in mind whom you'd like to work with, you might look at their output and consider whether there are any gaps. For example, a company's catalogue might contain multiple examples of different types of card drafting all across their range, but one type of card drafting stands out because it hasn't yet appeared. Perhaps that's an area that you could explore as a designer. Let's look at a problem from a publisher perspective. So Gamewright, they've got an extremely popular evergreen title in their game Sushi Go, which they licensed in 2014. They clearly want to capitalise on its success. In 2016, Gamewright released Sushi Go Party, a toolbox whereby players can create a huge number of different experiences by mixing and matching the cards in the deck. And this provides enormous replayability, but it also has the downside of preventing a direct sequel. What experience could a follow-on game offer which Sushi Go Party hasn't already got covered? So Gamewright could define their problem as, how do we produce a standalone game which is identifiable as Sushi Go, but provides value as an additional purchase to a Sushi Go owner? Their solution was to commission a dice-based subversion of the original game. The design challenge here is, how would Sushi Go work if it used dice instead of cards? And Sushi Roll was Phil Walker Harding rising to that challenge. To return to our starting point, the design thinking process. A designer's starting point should be to understand their audience, to recognise their desires and problems. And I hope this video has helped to give you some ideas about the next stage in that process, defining those problems. Maybe leave a comment below with some examples of problems that you would like to see solved in tabletop games. And please keep coming back for more content like this, and don't forget to subscribe, and then I'll see you on the next video. Until then, all the best.